And so for me, what I learned was we really need to continue to build on what the Downtown Detroit Partnership has been saying for a long time, and that's that the core of our city, especially, which is where we generate a good bit of our focus, is no longer a central business district. It really is a central connecting district.
That was the voice of Eric Larson, the CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership, and he is my guest today. Longtime listeners of the show will understand completely why I wanted to talk to Eric, but in case you don't know, the Downtown Detroit Partnership is a group that brings together philanthropy, businesses, and government to basically make a lot of things happen in downtown Detroit. If you see progress in downtown Detroit, one way or another, the DDP is probably involved. So we have a wide-ranging conversation today, whether it's the upcoming NFL draft, new murals, housing affordability, converting skyscrapers into apartments. Like there's a ton of topics that we talk about. So I think it's an interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoy your Daily Detroit for Thursday, October 19th, 2023. I am Jer Stays, and we will jump into that conversation with Eric Larson after we pay a bill.
Does your financial advisor take the time to really listen to you? Is your financial strategy personalized to you and your family? Will your financial advisor be there as your life and financial situation change? Hi, I'm Jerry Mangona, your Edward Jones financial advisor. I live here in Corktown, just a few blocks from the Daily Detroit studios, and when we work together, we'll focus on what's important to you. We'll use an established process to create a personalized financial strategy backed by the advice, tools, and resources to help you reach your goals. And we'll partner together to help your strategy stay on track. Contact me toll-free today at 866-975-8655. Again, that's 866-975-8655. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
Joining me on the line, Eric Larson, the CEO of the Downtown Detroit Partnership. Been a while. Welcome back to Daily Detroit.
Jared, thank you so much. It's great to be back with you, and it has been way too long. I think I've bumped into you at all the great events, but we just haven't had a chance to chat, so thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. We should make sure to make it happen more often. I'll start with kind of the newest first. In my inbox is a really interesting thing. I'd seen some new murals pop up around greater downtown Detroit, and I did not realize that the Downtown Detroit Partnership has something to do with them. I've already gotten a couple of emails from listeners. So why don't you talk about this mural project before we get into everything else?
Well, I love the fact that, one, you're on the distribution list, not surprisingly, but two, that your listeners are already weighing in, and I'm really interested in hearing what they're saying to you. This was a really unique opportunity that came out of, quite frankly, some of the pre-planning for the NFL draft that's coming in April of 2024. The city has been very, very engaged in making sure that not only the downtown, but the city as a whole is ready to both reflect the positive change that we've seen in our city, but also really make sure that we're giving the best first impression to a lot of visitors that, quite frankly, will have just be experiencing Detroit for the first time. And these murals are one of those things. Rochelle Riley at the city, along with Antoine Bryant at the planning department, got together and decided that this was a program that actually is in many ways sponsored by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and is a group out of Miami that has been doing this all over quite frankly, all over the world, but has been building quite a repertoire of mural installations around the U.S. I think their biggest installation currently is Houston, Texas, where they have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 of these murals. And I think for us in Detroit, it's particularly interesting because, one, it is a very important message. It's bringing awareness to a really challenging subject matter, which is obviously youth challenges and just sort of how you can work together as a community to better protect our citizens, but mostly, our young citizens. This happens to be titled Be the Change. I think that's incredibly apropos because, not only is it be the change as we move towards the draft and really reflect on the changing city and the opportunities that we have in front of us, but also, be the change in someone's life and making sure that we're supporting each other and making sure that we've got not only a humanity focus, but also, a focus of real equity and equality. And so it couldn't be better timing. We were thrilled to be asked by the city to help partner. And some of our biggest stakeholders, out of the first 6 murals that were installed, 4 of those are part of the Illich Olympia Development District, which is really neat for them to have been willing to lean in the way they did. And then we've got a number of other public assets that are getting activated. And this is just the first phase. Between now and spring, we're hoping that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 of these murals strategically placed throughout the city.
You mentioned the NFL draft. That's going to be a pretty big deal, isn't it? As we get closer to the date, it feels like more and more things are happening around it.
Yeah, it's really funny. We got so excited in 2006 for the Super Bowl, and you probably remember all that build up to that. And that was just 2 teams coming to the city to compete. This is 32 teams coming to the city to compete, 8 of which are within 500-mile driving distance of Detroit. So I personally think this is, and I'm biased, obviously, because, we're coming up on the draft, but I personally think this is bigger than the Super Bowl. It's a huge opportunity, for the city to really show how far we've come and the kinds of opportunities, both in terms of just entertainment and, visitor, but also investment. And so, having who knows how many hundreds of thousands of people we'll actually have in the city of Detroit, but many of them are staying over, what is a really long weekend because it starts on Thursday and runs all the way through Sunday in terms of the activity and the activations. And, the NFL has created this model where before it, was one place, it was in New York, it was at Radio City, and, that was great. But now they've created this model where they're taking this show on the road. It'll be outside. It's completely free and accessible to anyone. We're very fortunate to be a part of that. The main footprint for the actual activities in the main theater will be right in the heart of our city, Campus Martius and Cadillac Square. That's incredibly exciting way to show off the city. And I think the other thing that's really fun is just to think about the number of partners that have come together. We would never be able to have done this or pulled this off, quite frankly, without the leadership and the reverence of the Lions. And if we're lucky, we'll be like Kansas City and we'll be hosting the draft right after we won the Super Bowl, given the way they're playing these days.
It used to be, I would think you're crazy, but I don't think you're crazy at all, Eric. I don't think you're crazy at all. It's a real possibility. You mentioned 2006, and I just realized in my head while you were talking, that was 18 years ago. I can't barely believe it.
Well, and it would be really fun, and it's something that, just sitting here talking to you, and this is what I love about having conversations with you, is doing a little bit of a look back and sort of thinking about how has the city changed. One of the things the Downtown Detroit Partnership does and really tries to generate, both informed decisions as well as, some real value for our members and for our community is we track a lot of that data. And so looking at what was the city's tax base back then, what was the level of investment? I mean, we mentioned a little bit earlier before this call that, we have our fall forum, which is focused on development. We have over $2.8 billion of investment in the pipeline. Go back to 2006 and, it'd be interesting to see sort of what level of investment, where the investment was headed, what kinds of things were being invested in. So great time to reflect on the past, but also really focus on how far we've come.
For sure. I do want to talk about that real estate report a little bit from that forum, because I feel like there was a lot of information in there that, I mean, if you've been around downtown, you kind of know some of it. Other stuff kind of caught people by surprise. Obviously, and I know this from doing multiple interviews and multiple conversations for multiple outlets, honestly, things have definitely changed since the pandemic. We can get into a few details, but overall, what's something that you learned from doing that real estate report?
Yeah, I think the thing that all of us sort of knew intuitively but needed to be refreshed is the level of return to office. We see all the reports. Detroit is not any different than many of our other cities around the nation, but the return to office definitely has changed. It hasn't rebounded at the same pace that many of our other industries have, like the hospitality and overall sort of visitorship. And so for me, what I learned was we really need to continue to build on what the Downtown Detroit Partnership has been saying for a long time, and that's that the core of our city, especially, which is where we generate a good bit of our focus, is no longer a central business district. It really is a central connecting district. It still is a CBD, but it just is replacing the central business district with a central connectivity district. And I think that's really key. It's key to guide us in terms of where we're not only making our investments, but also how we're marketing the city. It's still important to get businesses not only to return but also to move into the city. We've got some incredible new office product that obviously is coming out of the ground, like the Hudson's project. But we also need to realize that no longer are we sort of a 9 to 5 economy. We are absolutely a 24/7 economy, and the only way we can sustain that economy is to make sure we've got residential, hospitality, entertainment, office, and that's really what we're focused on.
Residential was a key part with a lot of the feedback that listeners and others feel like residential needs to be the focus. When I've done some reporting, I've noticed that the places and cities that have come back more with the pandemic have been places that have focused a lot on residential. What are some of the things that the DDP is doing to kind of encourage that? Because a resident in Detroit, I mean, yes, it's always great to have a worker down, but a resident, I mean, there's a different kind of stakeholder when you live in a place. And even when you shop and patronize some of those businesses, if you're in a position where you're coming home every night to downtown Detroit, or you work in downtown Detroit and live down there, that's a lot of like recirculation of money and practically a large benefit for the city as a whole.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, Jared. And I think that's one of the things that's so unique about Daily Detroit and the way that you report and focus on ultimately what's at the heart of moving us forward. We, have long thought about the fact that we need to continue to build on our residential base here in the city, not just throughout the city, but also in the core of the downtown. The stat for residential and supporting sustained amenity-based kind of retailing that every community needs is about 10,000. And for a long time, we've been at about a roughly 7,000 resident number in the core of the downtown. And we have been focused on continuing to grow that. We had an interesting presentation by Gensler. John Waller, who's the managing partner of the Detroit office, was comparing us to some of our sister and brother cities around the country. And, the average population in the core of those cities downtown was 0.05 of the region. So 0.05% of the region's population lived in the core of those downtowns. In Detroit, it's 0.017. So we're a fifth of the draw for our region in our core downtown. And so that's something that we need to continue to improve on. We need to find out why more of the region isn't thinking of downtown Detroit as a place to live. Clearly has been the biggest office market in our region for a long time, but we need to make sure that the residents are focused on it. And that's a lot through not only the residential units that are coming online, of which we have over 1,000, pretty much being delivered per year. And, the good thing is the occupancies are well in excess of 85-90% in all of those projects. So there's a good demand. It's just a matter of catching up in terms of the supply. I also think we need to continue to build on the amenities. People need to feel comfortable. They need to feel safe. They need to feel like there's something to do when they walk out their door. And so the public spaces that we activate and the events that we create, over 2,000 of those, mostly free, are all things that create an opportunity for the residential community to come together in unique ways. You know this better than anybody, but a great example is Capitol Park, where we've been making a significant investment. We're on the second phase through a revitalization program that the MEDC has at the state level to transform that little pocket neighborhood park. But in that neighborhood, which is a fairly small but dense neighborhood, we've got senior housing, we've got market rate housing, we have affordable housing, we have office, we have obviously restaurant and entertainment. And what we found is that park is where people come to play chess and checkers. It's where they come to have block parties. It's where they come to walk their dog. We've expanded the dog park. I can't reinforce the importance of the residential in the overall resiliency of our downtown, but I also can't underestimate our need and our responsibility to deliver services and opportunities and amenities that support that.
From those numbers, and even from my travel to some of our like cities, because I don't think you can really put like Chicago and New York in the same bucket as Detroit. You have to talk about cities that are more like-minded, maybe your Milwaukee's, your Columbuses, things like that. You got to think a little bit differently as far as development and density, and the kind of development that works in a single family environment is going to be a little different than a downtown. I know in Metro Detroit over the years, we're not as culturally known to that unless you travel to those cities. So what are some of the things that could help from maybe a policy or a public support way to help encourage more of that density so that more residential is built, more supply is out there? I mean, I know that pricing is sometimes a function of supply and demand. What are some things could help supercharge that for you?
I mean, I think that there's a couple things. We're working on some federal legislation for the conversion of what would be considered obsolete office buildings. So as the office demand changes, some of the B and C buildings aren't going to be as competitive. Those that have a choice in the office market will have a flight to quality. So they'll be moving to, either the new buildings or buildings that have higher amenity and just sort of function better. And so that leaves some product. And in Detroit, we've been really fortunate because we didn't have the demand for new construction through some of the earlier booms in our earlier years, like some of the other places around the country. And so we've got a lot of older stock that actually works really well for conversion. And so if we get this federal tax credit, that'll encourage some more of those conversions. We've already had 25 old office buildings converted to either hotel or residential. Again, part of the presentation at the Fall Forum that Gensler provided was this really unique analysis of an older property and its competitiveness in terms of being repositioned for a different use. And it's not just obviously the floor plate design, but it's also where it sits, what kinds of amenities it has around it, what's the walk score, all that stuff gets factored into it. And so I think leveraging that and really continuing to educate not only the development community, but also the general public on why those are important and what the opportunity is. I also think just because of our land mass in the core of the downtown, it's 1.1 square miles. By default, we've got an opportunity to continue to generate some density. It's definitely more sustainable. And the only way we're going to actually create the number of units and the density of population that we're all talking about is through that. And then last, I think it's very interesting to watch what the mayor is trying to do in terms of this land tax. And I think that one of the things we have to continue to do is think about how we encourage additional development. Some of the impediments has been often in the past, the highest and best use of land in Detroit was parking. We need to realize that, not only is mobility changing and people are going to start moving around differently in the future, but also there are better ways to provide the amenity of parking, but still allow that lot, for instance, that surface lot to get developed. So working on policy that helps encourage that, I think, is also very important.
You mentioned the LVT. Is that something that you all support, or are you waiting? Like, what are your feelings on that?
No, we do support that. I mean, we obviously, know that our membership and our constituency in the downtown, obviously spans, both sides of that issue. But, we do believe in the long run, it is very important to address some of the tax disparity, but also create opportunities for people to see a path forward with their property that, maybe wouldn't be as clear or as economical if we don't start to challenge some of those. I think that the other thing that we're doing is we're trying to help some of those key stakeholders understand the value proposition. A great example is the Sterling Group is just finishing their 420 unit apartment complex on the West Riverfront. Those units, the top units of which they have 4 penthouses, one have already pre-leased. They don't even open the building until February of next year. But they not only have pre-leased, they've pre-leased it at new high water marks for our per square foot rates. And so there's a demand. And I think part of what we're trying to do is say, let's get the tax structure a little bit better. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. Nothing that we do from a policy standpoint is going to appeal to all sides. But let's continue to try and get it better. And then let's work with those that have those opportunities to really help them understand where the future opportunity and the future value is.
You mentioned that high water mark, and I know a lot of people are very interested in that. I also know that a lot of people are interested in the more affordable side. I don't mean the deeply affordable. That I understand completely that kind of when you try to get to the median level of the city of Detroit, you need deep federal subsidies to pull those kinds of projects off. I'm talking more of the missing middle that's happening in a lot of cities around. Is that a concern for you? And it's the concern that I hear from people of, I've been in downtown Detroit for 2-3 years, whatever, and my rent keeps going up. How do you look to kind of deal with that? As I said, I'm not talking about the heavily subsidized. It's more of that middle class, maybe paying $2,000, $2,500, $1,800 a month for a place. Then their rent goes up, $500 or something like that. It starts to push them away.
Yeah, Jared, it's a huge issue for us, and workforce housing and that missing middle is critical. It's not just obviously those that are here, it's those that we're trying to attract. It's obviously a big part of our growth strategy in terms of the immigrant population that is just getting started, in an employment track. So it is absolutely something that, the Downtown Detroit Partnership is focused on and is encouraging. I think there are a couple things that are positive there, and it's always, again, a little bit of a push and pull, no different than, new policy. We have to continue to find unique ways to finance projects so that owner developers are encouraged or at least discouraged from just pure straight market rate. The city has done a great job of making sure that any project in the city that has any kind of city support is required to have a minimum of 20% of the units at 80% of AMI. That's a great start. I think a lot of our local developer community has made that commitment and actually expanded on it. And then I think the other thing is, again, back to some of the product that we have that can be converted. I am very encouraged that one of the strategies, and it's not a strategy exclusive to Detroit, but one of the strategies that is being deployed to make sure there is affordable and accessible housing is by leveraging some of these older assets. Your basis, if you can buy the building correctly, is less than it would be to construct. The renovation should be, obviously less than the interior fit up, and then that allows you to rent at more competitive rates. And so we need to really push to make sure that that's what's happening. Some of it is through policy, and some of it is obviously through education. But I think the two we're doing pretty well in Detroit on. It's not perfect, and we've seen significant inflation over the last sort of 12 to 24 months. And so it's only going to get more challenged. And we at the partnership are really focused on that. The other thing I would just say, Jared, is we are constantly sort of assessing that landscape. So we're not only looking at the unit counts, we're looking at how they're priced, we're looking at where they're located in terms of the diversity of both product as well as pricing. And then we're also working with consultants. Like we had a universal design consultant a couple months ago, Steve Wright, who did an assessment of our downtown for us that looked at, again, not just the ADA accessibility. He's really looking at universal design, and that gets to, what are some of the income disparities? What are some of the barriers to entry, from a housing? Where are some of the wraparound services that are needed? What are the kinds of things we can do for the population that's unsheltered? What are some of the hygiene stations that, really are necessary in our public spaces? So we really are trying to think about this holistically. We're not perfect. We got a long way to go, and we want lots of feedback, even if it's critical, as long as it's constructive. But I do think we're on the right trajectory.
Before I let you go, I got to ask this, as I can't believe it. We are in the final stretches of 2023. What are you most excited for between now and the end of the year?
Oh, great question. So from a selfish DDP perspective, I love the holidays because not only do we officially kick off the holidays in Detroit with our tree lighting, and this is the 20th year of the Detroit tree lighting centered in the campus marshes. But then we roll right into Detroit Aglow, which is just this great friend-raiser, not even a fundraiser, friend-raiser with VIP turkey carvers, which is really fun. And then obviously all the things that, the holidays bring with our ice rink and the winter markets and the winter lodge. And it's just a great time to be downtown, and it's a great way to extend the vibrancy of our city and the vibrancy of our Midwest winters. But I also think, quite honestly, I'm most excited about, the strides that we've made. I think we're entering into 2024 and exiting 2023 with, a return to pre-pandemic numbers of visitors. Our hotels are back to, pre-pandemic levels of occupancy and room rates. And the restaurant and bar business is very strong. I think where we, have an opportunity moving into 2024 and closing out this year is continuing to support the small businesses. But Jared, I'm most excited about what the end of the year brings in terms of our ability to come together as a community, celebrate those things that, we've really done well this year, but also reflect on those that are still in need.
For sure. And, you mentioned some of those events. I know that we're going to do some episodes on them here on Daily Detroit, whether it's the markets, we're coming up on tree season, all those things. Eric Larson, thank you so much for your time on Daily Detroit. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too. And thanks again for this top opportunity.
All right, that is it for today. I want to hear your thoughts on this one. 313-789-3211 or dailydetroit@gmail.com. All right, a little programming note. Cheyenne Noserini will be in for Devin O'Reilly tomorrow. He needs to take a mulligan. He will be back next week. But of course, we're still going to have a ton of interesting coverage and fun stuff for your Friday. With that, I am Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Leave those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.